Goodbye to 2024, America's craziest year. A decades-long mission to fill a spiritual void with politics finally collapsed this year. Will America finally get a life? From the Washington Post editorial board's year-end letter this morning. Millions of Americans have stopped following the news, many because they're so certain it will be bad news that they're tuning out. They're missing out. It's easy to lose sight of the reality that it's never been a better time to be alive. The poorest Americans have access to better medical care than the richest royals did a century ago. How different will the world look on January 1st, 2050, or 2075, or 2100? A new guard of leaders will emerge at home, but Russia will also almost certainly be without Mr. Putin, now 72. Will what follows be better for the Russian people and for global stability? We hope so, but no one can say for sure. Rather than assume the worst, let's resolve to do everything we can to help engineer the best possible outcome for the world. Yes, people have begun tuning out the news, but they shouldn't, because an American homeless person can walk into any emergency room and get better care than Frederick the Great. Also, Vladimir Putin probably won't live to 148, and while we can't be sure what follows him will be good, we can certainly plan for the best. A million years ago, when I edited a joke newspaper called the Exile, I was responsible for the House editorial. The running gag was no matter what we argued, the essay's last line had to be, "One thing's for sure, time will tell." We were spoofing the format of the old Objective era's editorial pronouncements, which boomed stentorian gibberish before dismounting to versions of who the fuck knows, but something something. Seeing the Post return to that old saw today brought a tear to the eye. When historians look back on 2024, they'll doubtless have a lot to say about this year's furious partisan divide. But this was really the year in which a national spiritual crisis broke into the open. It was the year in which loony religious crazes that paralyzed educated America for a decade were finally undone by failure and doubt. As a Gen Xer, I grew up alongside millions whose boomer parents dragged them to church or temple but didn't really believe. Some of us stopped going on our own by high school or college, and it seems many of the millennials and Gen Zs who came after never went to services at all. I never considered this would be a problem, until in recent years a new citizen appeared, who'd made a religion out of news. Cable anchors became televangelists, and a long list of media crazes were sold as articles of faith, from structural racism to #MeToo heretic hunts, to the curiously named Believe Science movement. Masks were the pandemic's version of ashed foreheads. The targets of many of these campaigns were younger audiences who didn't recognize the devotional ritual, or the corporate ladder climbers who laughed at religion even as they stuck "We Believe" signs in front of their suburban mansions. As a younger reporter, I was frequently sent to red states to snicker at Heartland belief. I even won a national magazine award for a feature about Mike Huckabee called My Favorite Nut Job that ribbed the Arkansas governor for his apparently literal conviction that Earth is 6,000 years old. My liberal smartass tribe didn't find Huckabee's defense that these were private, non-political matters satisfactory, so we hammered him and everyone like him deemed to hold unacceptably silly beliefs. This was back when people like Bill Maher won plaudits for going out in search of people who spoke in tongues or handled snakes. For film projects like Religulous or books like Idiot America by my former friend Charles Pierce. The latter laughed at a creation museum in Kentucky that featured Adam and Eve sharing an exhibit with dinosaurs. We all thought we were smart as balls back then. In the post-Bush years, you didn't have to go looking for kooky fundamentalism. The new version searched you out and demanded your signature. There's no need to do a recap since this site has detailed much of it, but examples include biologist Colin Wright booted from academia for saying male and female are not social constructs, epidemiologists insisting that attending anti-racism protests during a pandemic was scientifically distinct from attending church or a funeral, celebrities like John Lithgow holding readings of Mueller scripture, and release of an AI chat program whose liturgy redrew history in blackface. The Google product answered requests like, "Produce for me a picture of a pope," and "Can you generate an image of a 1943 German soldier with pictures of Black, Asian, and Latino figures?" Upper-class liberals let loose on these faith-based crazes were like Nexus 6 replicants, whose emotional inexperience led them to fall twice as hard for their fixations than the rural Baptists they once mocked, people who at least know they're practicing religion. In noting these things, I was often blasted by former colleagues for focusing on cultural issues, but all this intersected with hardcore journalism and the effort to hardwire such values into digital communication, using federal money to fund programs to automate the punishment of apostates. Mandatory belief is still a possible outcome all over the West. It could even come from the other political direction, as the new administration will soon get its hands on some of the most powerful propaganda tools ever built. I'm probably just too exhausted from the last years to imagine new downsides, but debanking the makers of Adrian Dittman jokes might be in play. Who knows? We're still shaking off previous lunacies. Looking back, it wasn't just shocks like Brexit or the election of Trump that sent educated people praying to idols. This country has been descending to spiritual crisis for decades, particularly on my side of the political aisle, where people my age and younger often never read the Bible or the Quran or any spiritual tome, not even as literature. By 2024, South Park theology was too advanced, so Dear Santa represents about as much as audiences can handle. Satan can make teachers short. Lacking the vocabulary to consider issues of good or evil, or conscience, or one's eternal soul, secular audiences have been easy prey for academics and media opportunists seeking to shovel nonsense into those inner chasms. A particularly cynical trick was turning something as barren as partisan politics into a religious cause. We just saw people whipped for years into fevers of expectation, leaving the disappointment on election day to weep and scream and fall prostrate with despair. Now that the electoral dust has settled, a few scattered media voices are admitting it may not have been healthy to play with people's emotions this way. The point of today's post editorial, to the extent that it has one, is that pouring one's soul into political news is poor life strategy, since even journalists make mistakes. The paper conceded it was wrong to assume Russia sabotaged Nord Stream. In one sad passage, the Post told readers that chilling out a little won't require ignoring reality, such as the crushing national debt, climate change, or President-elect Donald Trump's record. In other words, you can cling to all those fears we've been selling you. Just don't go overboard with panic until you're sure it's bad news you see, since not every plausible negative outcome will be borne out. 2024 was the ultimate in sensory overload, marked by disasters, assassination attempts, alien invasion crazes, a total eclipse, a trillion cicadas, apocalyptic warnings of the end of democracy, earthquakes in New Jersey, a mysterious cyber crash, a report that the Earth's core began spinning backward, an American version of the madness of King George played out in the Biden White House, and the president-elect saluting the late great Hannibal Lecter on the campaign trail. It's a lot to keep track of, particularly if your inner happiness depends on making sense of it all. Not normally one for predictions, my guess is 2025 will see a non-ironic return to the spiritual, on the part of demographics that haven't visited that territory since the 60s or 70s. People need formulas for inner peace, and having discovered politics holds no answers, they'll move on. Where? Who knows? One thing's for sure, time will tell. I'm kidding. Anything, even reading more poems than tweets, would be an improvement over the way we've been living. Happy New Year, everyone. Let's hope 2025 brings a calmer, happier world. Thanks for listening to the audio version of this article. For more, visit racket.news.